ever feel like you're chasing a moving target, or like being good enough always feels like it's just out of reach? I get it. Growing up with a father who was an addict, losing a parent at a young age, and battling obsessive compulsive disorder throughout my life has taught me much about shame, guilt, and always trying to be good enough. But what if being good enough is a myth? What if your worth is not something to chase or try to measure up to? This is the Enough Effect podcast, a space to rewrite the narrative, share stories, and discover the power of being you exactly as you are. Welcome back to the Enough Effect podcast. I'm your host, Abby Tabilos, and I'm so excited for today's episode. I try to base what we're going to be talking about on the podcast on my real and lived experiences with mental health difficulties, because if I've learned anything about mental illness and mental health, it's that there's not a ton of unique experiences, and there's a lot of things that a lot of people experience. And I think if there's anything good about the internet, it's that it's a place to be seen and heard and validated, and that's what I'm aiming to do today. I recently tried to describe to some loved ones what it's like when you experience a mental health relapse. And to be honest, using the word relapse does feel slightly triggering to me, just because I've always associated that with addiction and the trauma that I have from that with my childhood. However, I think that it's also important to note that, a lot of mental illnesses also have relapses, and it's not something to be ashamed of, even though if you're someone with OCD, it likes to try and make you feel ashamed of it. And I explained that experience to my friend by saying, I like to think of it as when you have kind of mastered living with OCD, or whatever mental illness you're struggling with, it's kind of like you started 6 feet underground in this deep dark hole, and you clawed your way up to the top and to the surface, and you were just kind of walking on level ground for a while in the sunshine. You weren't underground. And then slowly over time, you kind of dug yourself into a hole. And I'm using the word dug yourself loosely because I don't think it's something you should be ashamed of. I think it's normal. But, your mental illness kind of chips away at you. Your intrusive thoughts chip away at you. Your anxiety chips away at you. Or another experience is that you're walking along and then one day you fall into a 10-foot hole. And in order to recover from that mental health relapse, you have to claw yourself back up. And you can't do that in one day, and it takes time. There's a lot of emotions that come along with that, especially if you're, hey, I let myself get back here again. And I told myself I was never going to let myself do that because I worked so hard to be here. And the cold hard truth is honestly that sometimes those relapses just happen. And sometimes there is a part of responsibility to play. No matter which experience you have or how you got back to that place of relapse, please be nice to yourself. I don't know if I've heard of anyone with any kind of mental health condition that hasn't had relapses, because you are changing your entire way of thinking and your entire way of thinking about feelings and things. And so it's normal to go back to your lifelong habits from time to time. So all of that being said, I recently went through a pretty intense OCD relapse. It was my first OCD relapse because I had very recently gotten to the point where I felt like I had dug myself out of a hole and I thought I had made it. And I'm a human. It was news to me. And what I found when I was at the bottom of this hole was that it can be pretty hard to have self-compassion when you're down there. And I was experiencing feelings of, okay, what do I do and how do I apply the tools and the things that I know I should be using to help myself feel better when I don't even feel like I deserve to feel better? How is one supposed to get out of a hole when they barely have enough self-compassion to let themselves make a mistake? Because it takes a lot of self-compassion to get through a mental health relapse. And that feels impossible because I've been there. And it's a difficult question to answer, but because my heart goes out to people who relate to that experience, I wanted to share 5 things I learned throughout my recent OCD relapse about how you can have self-compassion when it feels impossible to do so. The first of these 5 reasons, I included it first because I think that there are people who are listening to this who may not be in a mental health relapse currently. And I just think that it's an important disclaimer before we really get into things. So the first reason is create a toolbox. As you go to therapy or listen to podcasts like this or whatever you're doing to treat your mental illness, please lean on those even when you're doing well. Because if you're only practicing those tools when you're drowning and when you're in the hole, it's going to be a million times harder. But if you're practicing those things every single day, then hopefully by the time you're in a relapse, it's going to feel more like second nature to utilize those tools and to practice them. And if you're currently in a relapse, don't feel bad about that. Like, it's not too late. You can start using these tools now. I just know how hard it is to pick your feet up. My goal has been to practice them every day and to create a toolbox. I actually, during one of my support group meetings, someone said that they keep their toolbox on their phone, kind of like as a FAQ type of situation. So it's like when it's hard to have self-compassion, here's your checklist. And I'm in the process of creating that. So if you would like access to it, all you have to do is follow me on social media at abstabs, ABSTABBS, and I'll share when that's done. It will be free. I just want to share that resource because I think it will be helpful. So that being said, number 2, when it feels impossible to have self-compassion, it's more important than ever to return to your values. If you are someone who does struggle with self-compassion, I would recommend trying to implement a value like self-respect or wisdom or even self-compassion into your set of core values and practice living that value so you can turn to it when things start to go south. That's something I've tried to do. I chose self-respect because I feel like when I'm lacking in self-compassion, it can be really derogatory. And so I would recommend not only having a list of your core values, but also having examples of how you turn to them and live them. And that's a resource that can take a long time to build. If you don't know where to get started, I do have a free resource on my website. It's called How to Change Your Relationship with Your Thoughts. There's a list of core values you can choose from there and kind of how you can get started. Again, it's totally free. My website's abbytabilos.com. But what I like to do with my core values is I have that list of what the core values are. And then I like to make kind of a vision board for each core value. And then I like to write a poem about what that value means to me. I like to make a playlist of songs that I can play when I want to remind myself or get myself into that space. And I just like to do those things so that I have an anchor in something concrete. Because when you're struggling and you're like, okay, one of my values is simplicity or adventure or self-compassion, I can't do that right now, but I can press play in a playlist and that will bring up emotions in me, or I can look at my vision board or read my poem. That's been something that's been very helpful for me. And that kind of leads me to the next item, which is number 3, and that is to practice mindfulness. I jokingly said to my therapist last week that it feels like no matter what mode of therapy or treatment that you seek out for OCD, the answer is always to be mindful. And if you don't know, being mindful is pretty much just a fancy word for how to be present in the present moment and not let your mind get catapulted into the past or the future or analyzing. It's just being present. And what I've found that's helpful to do this is to focus on my 5 senses. I have a lot of videos about how to do that on my social media. And also, I like to just ask myself the question, what's most important to me right now? Or, hi, Abby, nice to meet you in the present moment. What's going on? And just using those things to remind myself that the past happened and the future's uncertain. So let's just stay right here, right now. And when you're struggling to have self-compassion, that's helpful because a lot of times that self-compassion stems from not being in the present moment. You might be feeling bad about yourself for getting into a relapse and what that means about your past and your future or whatever. And so just saying, I'm in a relapse right now. This is what it feels like. All I can do is take the next step and just feel what's right in front of me. Number 4 is actually something that I saw on social media. That's why I do have a love-hate relationship with social media, and the love side is that I do occasionally get these nuggets of things that just kind of make a core memory in my head, but one therapist said, and I'll tag it in the show notes, the video, because I want to give her credit, but she said, you don't have to make this mean so much. You don't have to make things mean so much. And that just, I'm like getting emotional talking about it because it clicked something for me. It really hit home for me, and I've used that so much as I've tried to get out of this relapse. Is it's like my OCD starts acting up and I'm like, I don't have to make this mean so much. And you don't. It just brings some freedom into your thoughts and not taking them all at face value. So thank you to that creator, again, putting it in the show notes or the video description right now so that you can go see it. And last but not least, the number 5 item to do when it feels impossible to have self-compassion is to start small. Because something I expressed to my support group was like, hey, I know the tools. I know the tools are to be mindful, and I know they're to be present, and I know they're to notice my emotions and accept them. I know how to dismiss my intrusive thoughts. I know how to resist my compulsions, but I can't because I hate myself. I'm exhausted. I'm discouraged. I can't do this. And that just all goes back down to just start small. Take one step. If you're drowning in anxiety or your OCD is just pounding you into the ground, all you have to do is focus on what you can do right now. Don't focus on how many weeks it's going to take you to get out of it or anything else. Just focus on taking one step, because I promise you the hardest part is just getting started. It's like the quote people have about the heaviest thing in the gym is the door, because once you're in the gym, it's a lot easier. It's just getting there. It's the same thing with these tools and skills for mental health recovery. The hardest thing is just to take one step. So practice, practice, practice. Take one step now, and as you get better, and you will, I promise, practice these things every day, and before you know it, fearing OCD relapses won't be so scary. I, of course, am still in a place where I'm a little bit frightened of them because I just have only had one and I'm learning, but you truly are not alone, and it's possible to master living life with OCD. So let's just support each other, and thank you for being here. Thank you for listening to the Enough Effect podcast. If you enjoyed listening, it would mean the world to me if you would subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment your favorite thing from today's episode. Plus, don't forget to hit up my social media at abstabs, ABSTABBS on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook for daily inspirational content to remind you that you can live a life built upon the resounding belief that being good enough was never an endeavor worth pursuing. Lastly, check out my show notes for any resources mentioned in this episode and my website, where you can find a list of all the ways I would love to work with you. See you next week, and don't forget that you are and always have been more.